Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavatpadam Shankaram Lokashankaram Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutrabhashya Krutau Vande Bhagavantau Punah Punah. Ishvaro Gururatmedi Murti Veda Vibhagine Vyomavadvyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Gukarastvandhakaro Vai Rukarastanivartakaha Andhakara Nirodhitvad Gururithyabhidhiyate. Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya madhyamam Asmadacharya paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Karturajnaya prapyate phalam Karma kim param karma tajjadam. Kruti mahodadhau patana karanam. Phalam shashvatam gati nirodhakam. Ishvararpitam nechaya kritam. Chitta shodhakam mukti sadhakam. Kvaya vangmanah karyamuttamam. Pujanam japaschintanam kramat. Jagata ishadhi yukta sevanam. Ashtamurti bhradeva pujanam. Uttamastavaduchyamandata. Chittajam japa dhyanamuttamam. Ajyadharaya srotasasamam. Sarala chintanam vidalatah param. Bheda bhavanat sohamityasau. Bhavana bhida pavani mata. Bheda Bhavanat, with a meditation performed with Bheda Bhavana or with a sense of duality or a conclusion of duality, that I am different and the object of meditation, Ishvara, is different. Atha anyam devatam upaste anyosau anyohamasmiti nasaveda yatha pashuhu. In Brihadaranyaka Upanishad it is said that when one worships a devata, the anyosau anyohamasmiti, devata is different and I am different. When the duality is there, then nasaveda, he does not know. Because intrinsically there is no difference between the worshipper and the worship. That's the reality. As we will see later on also. So even though right now there is the conclusion that I am a limited individual and there is this duality that Ishvara is different, I am different, Jagat world is different, I am different, even though if that seems to be my experience right now, that experience or conclusion should not become reality. But in the mind, there must be this clear understanding that non-duality is the reality. There is a unity in diversity. In the apparent duality or apparent diversity, there is oneness, which is what connects everything. As Lord Krishna says, Mayi Sāram Vedam Protam Sutre Maniganaiva. Just as the pearls are threaded into one sutra, one thread. Similarly, this universe of names and forms is all threaded into me. I am the self that informs everything. And thus, there is this, the non-duality is the basis. So, therefore, even when worship is carried out with duality, one must have this clarity that the ultimate objective is to erase this duality and not to perpetuate the duality. Abhida Bhavana Pavani Mata. That Abhida Bhavana, that attitude of non-duality, Pavani Mata, is considered to be purifying. Meaning, it is what is conducive to removal of ignorance. Of course, it is knowledge that will remove the ignorance, but still, this even the attitude of non-duality also does a lot of work in terms of preparing the ground for knowledge of non-duality. So this meditation now, what does it lead to, or what should it lead to? The 9th verse tells us that Bhava Shunya Sad Bhava Susthiti. Sthiti, that visarga must be chanted. Bhava Shunya Sad Bhava Susthiti. Bhavana Balad Bhaktiruttama. Bhakti Uttama. Uttama Bhakti. What is the most exalted bhakti? What is the most exalted devotion? Bhava Shunya Sadbhava Susthiti. Susthiti. The state of abidance. Sadbhava Susthiti. Sadbhave Susthiti. Sat means existence. Sadbhava Susthiti. Sadrupe Paramatmani Susthiti. Sat means existence, or Sat means Asti Bhati Priyam. Sat means Satchit Ananda. It means Paramatma. The Chandogya Upanishad use the word Sat. Sadeva Somya Idam Agrasit Ekameva Dvitiyam. where the teacher says to the disciple that this world of names and forms was nothing but Sat, one and non-dual before its creation. Like saying that all these pots and pans were just the clay before their creation. The one and non-dual clay, all these pots and pans were one non-dual clay before the creation. So the question is that after the creation of pots and pans, is there anything other than clay? Even when pots and pans are there, the reality is nothing but clay. Then why do you say that they were all clay before the creation? Because right now we appreciate clay also as well as pots and pans also, whereas earlier there was no pots and pans, all there was appreciation of clay. To convey that even when you see pots and pans, all there is just clay. Similarly, even when we perceive these names and forms, all there is just one Sat or Chit or Ananda. So here Ramana Maharsi uses the word Sat. Sadbhava, Sadbhava Sadrupe, Sadbhave Susthitihi, Sadrupe Susthitihi, Sadrupe Paramatmani. Sad means Paramatma, Paramatmani Susthitihi. Sthitihi, abidance. Abidance in Paramatma is Uttama Bhakti. So mind abiding in the self is the highest devotion. Or the culmination of all devotion. So this is the topic of bhakti or devotion. And even the meditation also was of the nature of devotion, mental worship. Where we were told that when you perform the worship, let there be the attitude of non-duality rather than duality. And thus we are performing meditation upon Ishvara, upon a form of Ishvara, upon the name, and then ultimately, as a result of that meditation, where there is an attitude of non-duality, the mind ultimately gets abiding in the non-dual. Or the state of the mind or abidance of the mind in the non-dual self or non-dual Paramatma is the highest devotion. How does that abidance happen? Bhavana balat. Abhida bhavana balat. Balat, on the strength of Abhida bhavana, on the strength of the attitude of non-duality. So meaning that if you are committed to or devoted to non-duality, so here we are told that devotion to non-duality is the highest devotion. Devotion to non-duality or oneness between the meditator and meditated, that devotion is the highest devotion, which culminates into becoming one with the object of devotion, meaning abidance in the self, abidance in the Paramatma. That is the highest devotion. Bhavana balat, Abheda dhyana balat. On this, because when you meditate, when you do something slowly and slowly, you get a certain momentum. So, when the mind also meditates upon the non-dual, when there is a constant attempt to meditate upon the non-dual, then slowly you develop the samskara or the habit of that. Mind gets a certain amount of momentum by constantly doing anything. So when we keep on doing something repeatedly, then mind develops a habit of doing it easy and easy. Ultimately that becomes effortless. So anything that you practice for a great length of time ultimately becomes effortless. As I said, even riding the bicycle also in the beginning it involves a lot of effort. You keep on doing it for a length of time, ultimately it becomes effortless. So also when the mind is engaged in thinking about any given thing, then slowly that thinking becomes effortless. So even if we think about Lord Krishna constantly, bhavana balat, on account of the strength of meditating upon, let us say, Lord Krishna, a time comes when that meditation becomes effortless. Because it is the nature of mind to assume the form of whatever it meditates upon. As the mind, so the man. And so, if the mind is made to think of a certain thing, mind assumes that form. In the morning we said that the mind can be molded into any form we want. Like pouring a molten metal in a die, how the metal assumes the form of dye also. Similarly, if you give the mind the occupation of thinking of Lord Krishna's form, let us say, constantly, then mind becomes that. So this is the nature of mind. And that is why they prescribe this meditation or repeating the same thing again and again and again in order to make the mind, in order to construct the mind, in order to create a mind of that form. So similarly also if the mind keeps on constantly dwelling upon non-dual, bhavana balat, then ultimately mind effortlessly abides in a non-dual, and this is called the highest devotion. So bhava shunya, where there is no bhava, bhava shunya. So many bhavas are there here in this verse. Bhava shunya, sad bhava susthiti, bhavana balat. That is poetic. But in each case, the word bhava means somewhat different. Bhava shunya. Bhava shunya means the sankalpa vikalpa shunya. Or bhava means also the devoid of duality, the knower known duality. Bhava shunya. A state of mind which is devoid of sankalpa vikalpa, state of mind devoid of that I am so and so, I am such and such, all that sankalpa vikalpa, when they all subside, then when the mind is free from the knower known duality, then it abides in what is non-dual. Sadbhava susthiti. Bhakti Uttama, that is the Uttama Bhakti, that is the highest devotion. See how Vedantins define devotion. Vivek Chudamani also says that what is bhakti? Swaswarupānusandhānam bhaktirityavidhiyate. Moksha sadhana samagriyam. Even if you have all the samagri or the equipment for moksha, like viveka, vairagya, samadhi, satka, sampattihi, mumukshutvam. Viveka Chudamani says that along with all of you require bhakti. What is that bhakti? What is Vedantin's bhakti? Swaswarupānusandhānam bhaktirityavidhiyate. Constantly meditating upon or dwelling upon the true nature of one's own self, swaswarupa. So mind, if we just leave it as it is, dwells upon the duality because it thinks that I am different and the world is different, etc. That mind is made to dwell upon one's own swarupa, soham, soham, soham. Swaswarupa anusandhanam, meditating upon one's true nature. So the Vedantins say that this anusandhanam or this constant dwelling upon the non-dual must be there. Even Upanishad also says that even when you are doing Shravanam, Mananam, whatever you are doing, there must be an awareness that what is being talked about is myself. When we were studying in Sandipani, there was one Westerner. All of us had desks like that, folding desks. On that he had written, he's talking about me all the time. That when you talk about Brahman, when you talk about Atma, you think that you're talking about something else. No, he is talking about me. And so, Swaswarupanusandhanam, Viveka Chudamani says that Anusandhanam, a constant deliberation upon, a reflection upon, meditation upon Swaswarupa, the true nature of oneself, Bhakti Ritya Vidyate, it is called Bhakti. Here also, Ramana Maharsi says that abidance of the mind in Soham, in non-dual, is the highest devotion. And therefore, concluding this discussion in the verse 10, Ramana Maharsi says, Krusthale mana swasthata kriya Bhakti yoga bodhascha nishchitam. Hrut-sthale. Hrut means heart. Hrut-sthale, Hrudaya-sthane. So, here Maharshi used the word Hrut or heart, which is generally interpreted as the physical heart. And in Yoga Shastra, they prescribe the concentration upon the heart. As we were saying in our discussion, that heart is 10 times more powerful than brain. And therefore, this, of course, the yogis must have known. And therefore, heart is one of the important places of concentration of the mind. It is also said that heart is the very locus of the mind. Every organ that we have has a locus. The organ of seeing has a locus in eyes. The organ of hearing has the locus in ears. Unlike that, the organ of tasting has a locus in tongue. The organ of smelling has locus in the nose. Understand that nose is a place where the organ of smelling functions. Nose is the gross counterpart of the organ of smelling. You know, we have a gross body as well as a subtle body. The gross body is what we perceive. What is subtle body? Subtle body is that which imparts sentiency to the gross body. And therefore, how do these scriptures describe death? Death is the departure of subtle body from this gross body. So when this subtle body departs, generally you say prana has departed, but prana is the component of the subtle body. Lord Krishna says, Mamaivamso jivaloke jivabhuta sanatana manashasthani indriyani prakritisthani karshati. Lord Krishna says that when the self departs from this body, it also carries with it the subtle body of sense organs, mind, etc. And so that subtle body is really the organ of, all organs of perception, organs of action, all of this make up the subtle body. And we have the gross counterpart on the gross body. Meaning that it is possible that the eyes are damaged and therefore a person cannot see. But the subtle eyes are there. The faculty of seeing is not destroyed, only the locus where the seeing takes place may be damaged. Suppose this fellow, this jiva, gets another birth, then if he has the eyes there, he will be able to see. Follow what I am saying? We have the gross eyes and we have the subtle eyes. The real faculty of seeing is the subtle faculty of seeing, which requires, of course, the locus in terms of the gross, the organ. Anyway, so just as the organs of perception have the loci in these various places, the organs of action also have the locus. Similarly, mind also has a locus which is said to be the heart. So Hrusthale, and therefore in heart is the locus of the mind, in the mind the consciousness gets reflected. Therefore, sometimes it is said that the self also resides in the heart. Self is not confined to the heart. The self is reflected in the mind and the mind resides in the heart. In that sense you say that the self is in the heart. So heart is a place of concentration. However, Hrusthale Manaha, abidance of the mind in the heart. What should we mean the word heart here? The Vedantin will say that heart here does not mean the physical heart. Heart means the very core of one's personality, which is the self. So Hrut here means the self. So Hrusthale, in the self. Manasvasthata, manasa svasthata, svasthitim, the abidance of the mind in the self is the highest devotion, is the ultimate goal, that the mind should abide in the self. And that is what is sought by Kriya, Bhakti, Yoga, Bodhascha. What is the purpose of all the spiritual practices or sadhanas? Is that the mind ultimately gets abiding in the self. Mind becomes the self. Really, the true nature of mind is nothing but self or consciousness. What is mind? Mind is nothing but the flow of thoughts. And what is the thought? So just as all these different ornaments are there and the material is gold, so every thought is like an ornament, is made up of what? What is the stuff of which the vritti is made? Ultimately it is consciousness. So mind is nothing but the consciousness which has assumed a name and form. Therefore, it is like saying that the ornament abides in gold. So what is the highest state for the ornament? Ornament abiding in gold. What do you mean, Swamiji? Ornament is gold. But suppose the ornament does not know that. Suppose the ornament does not know that I am gold, and ornament takes itself to be merely a name and form, that I am a bangle. And this other thing thinks that I am an earring. That's called ignorance. For an ornament to think that I am a bangle or I am an earring or I am such and such, then the ornament, that means that ornament takes itself to be nothing but a name and form. Even though in reality ornament is nothing but gold, but because of ignorance that ornament misses that fact, that's all. It is not that the ornaments will become gold, ornaments to know that I am gold. And for that the ornament requires another ornament, a guru ornament is required. A disciple ornament, our Swamiji used to give us example of the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. There is a wave in the Pacific Ocean which thinks that I am a wave. I am just this, I am a wave confined to a given name and form and different from other waves. And I am constantly being attacked by other waves, I have to protect myself. That I am born, I am now rushing towards the shore and I will be crushed, I will die. This poor wave is thus suffering because it takes itself to be a name and form. So an Atlantic wave comes there. So there is a guru wave, comes from Atlantic, from India. And gives instruction to the wave, hey, you are not a wave, you are water. It is not that the wave is to become water. All that is necessary is for the wave to recognize that the name and form is something that is incidental. The essential, the inherent nature of myself is water. The unchanging nature is water. Just as in this pot also there is clay and a name and form. So potness is the name and form that is coming and going. It is incidental. If the pot falls from a hand and breaks down, it will have a different name and a form. But the fact that it is clay can never be denied. Clay is the abiding aspect of this pot, whereas name and form are the transitory aspect, the transient aspect. What is abiding is reality, what is coming and going is not reality. Similarly also, the ornament is, the gold is the abiding reality. So also the mind. What is the abiding reality of mind? As we said, consciousness, assuming a name and form, alone is called a thought. And therefore, consciousness is the core of the thought, the core of the mind. And so, the Vedantin will say that abidance of the mind in the Atma is nothing but the mind knowing that I am Atma, I am consciousness. This bangle is never away from gold, really. Only on account of identifying with the name and form, the bangle thinks that I am just a name and form different from other ornaments. And so also the mind thinks that I am an individual mind different from other things, but the mind or the self, the ahankara I should say, that has to know that the consciousness or the self is the truth about myself. That is the bodha, that is the knowledge. Hrustale manasvasthata. Svasthata. Swasmin atmani sthitata. Swasthata nisthata. Abidance in the swasthata means abidance in the self. Manasvasthata. Manasa swasthata. Abidance of the mind in the self. Where? Hrustale, in the heart, in the core of its being, which is consciousness, is the ultimate goal sought by Kriya, Bhakti, Yoga, Bodha. Kriya is Karma Yoga. First described Ishvararpitam, Nechaya Kritam, Chitta Shodakam, Mukti Sadakam, Karma Yoga. Bhakti, Kaya Vang Mana, Karyamuttamam, Pujanam Japas, Chintanam Kramat. Bhakti. Yoga will be described later on. Yoga is the mastery over the mind, the absorption of the mind. And Bodha is a knowledge. So this sequence, Karma, Bhakti, Yoga, Bodha. Karma Yoga we require first in order to make the mind free from the impulses of ragadveshas. As we said, what is Karma Yoga? Performing the karma with the attitude of being a contributor, being attitude of the non-self, selflessness, or attitude of offering to Ishvara. Bhakti, then creating oneself, making oneself a full-time devotee by special practices of the worship performed at the level of the body, level of the speech, level of the mind. You can also call it upasana. Then yoga. By yoga is meant the Ashtanga yoga. Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi, the ability to be able to completely control one's mind or create an absorption of the mind. And Bodha, the knowledge that the knowledge on the part of the bangle that I am gold. Knowledge on the part of ahankara that I am the self. Nishchitam. This is the Nishchitam. This is the Pramana Niranitam. This is what is the conclusion of all the scriptures. That the purpose of all the spiritual practices ultimately is bodha or knowledge. And what is the knowledge? Knowledge soham, that I am Brahman, I am limitless. And abidance in that knowledge is the ultimate goal of all spiritual practices. That is the highest devotion. That is the highest karma yoga. That's the highest bhakti. That's the highest yoga. That's the highest knowledge. Meaning that is the purpose of all the spiritual practices, is the abiding knowledge. Soham, I am that, or I am limitless. That abiding knowledge is the purpose of all these spiritual practices of karma yoga, bhakti yoga, Patanjali yoga, and jnana yoga or bodha. By jnana yoga, we mean the vichara in the form of shravanam, mananam, nididhyasanam. Shravanam meaning an inquiry into the nature of the self, nature of Brahman, carried out with the help of the teacher, with the help of the scriptures. Meaning listening to the teacher, but listening is not simply listening. Here listening means vichara, a deliberation. Shravanam literally means listening. But what is meant by Shravanam here in Vedanta is vichara. Meaning, it is the deliberation upon these statements of the Upanishads. Mananam, reflection upon that to remove the doubts. Nididhyasanam, to remove the habitual error. That's how one gains an abidance in knowledge. So this is how the discussion on karma and bhakti is concluded here in the 10th verse. And now, in the next few verses, Ramana Maharsi talks about yoga. Not all the 8 limbs of yoga, but one limb of yoga, namely pranayama. And so it seems Ramana Maharsi here prescribes that pranayama or the restraint of the breath is a very important practice which one should carry out or one should resort to if necessary. So normally the mind dwells upon the sense objects because as Kathopanishad says, Ishvara has made this mind extrovert. Paranchikhani vyatrunas swayambhuhu. Swayambhuhu, the Paramatma Ishvara, has made the sense organs in the mind extrovert. Tasmat parang pashyati nantaratman. Therefore, mind always and sense organs always, they are all directed outward. They never see the self. Kaschid dhiraha pratyagatma namaikshada avruta chakshuhu amrutatvam. Kaschid dhiraha, some rare, wise, discriminating person. Amrutatvam icchan, who desires amrutatvam, who desires immortality. A non-discriminating person, an aviveki or a non-discriminating person thinks that the purpose is to get as much enjoyment I can get from the objects of the world. Parachah kaman anuyanti balaha. Kathopanishad says that the immature or aviveki, non-discriminating people always chase the object, the pleasures of the sense objects. But the wise, discriminating one sees. Dhruvam adveshu na prarthayante. He realizes that all the objects are all perishable and therefore the immortality, the imperishable cannot be obtained from the objects. Therefore, desiring immortality, desiring the permanent happiness. Amrutatvam ichan, desire immortality. Avruta chakshuhu, he turns his eyes inward, meaning turns his senses inward, turns his mind inward. So this is the most important thing, turning the mind inward. The mind's natural tendency is to run out because of ignorance and because of habitual error, because of this wrong conclusion that happiness is in the sense objects or happiness is in the objects and achievements of the world. This is the conclusion of the mind or conclusion of the ego, an ignorant ego. So, a very important thing to do is to completely turn around this flow of mind, which is an extremely difficult task. The Tikakara in Kathopanishad says that it's like reversing the flow of river. River is flowing. Similarly, the river of the mind originates from the heart and flows out through the gates of the sense organs into the world, and that's how the river is flowing. Its energies are squandered. Thus, then turning around, can you imagine turning the flow of the river to its source? Similarly, turning the flow of mind to its source, which is hrit or heart, and so this is something to be accomplished. Karma Yoga is meant for this. The karma, bhakti, yoga, all of these are meant for completely reversing the flow of the mind from extrovert to the introvert. So in Karma Yoga, this was accomplished by the right attitude. The attitude of being a contributor, the attitude of selflessness, not submitting oneself to ragadveshas and performing actions which are in the spirit of worship of the Lord or offering to the Lord. There is bhakti also. Really, Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga are not different. Because when karma or action is performed with bhakti, then it is called yoga. So even this kayavang manah karyam uttamam, when they talk of the practices of worship at the level of body, at the level of speech, at the level of mind, the Vedantins include them in Karma Yoga only. Because it's karma. At the body level, level of body, level of speech, level of mind, it is karma. If that doesn't, then what is an other way of doing it? Is what you call the Ashtanga Yoga. That's an alternate. So there are many paths. Not many paths to moksha, but there are more than one path to the control of the mind. For mind control, there are various means prescribed. Even the Hindu tradition prescribes, Vedanta prescribes various means like Karma Yoga or like the Patanjali Yoga. So there is a common notion that there are many paths leading to the same goal. A hymn called Mahimna Stotra also says that Trayi Sankhyam Yoga Pashupatimatam Vaishnavaiti Prabhinne Prasthane Paramidamatah Pathyamidicha Ruchinam Vaichitriat Rujukutilendana Patajusham Nunameko Gamya Payasam Arnavaiva. Tvamasi. Oh God, you alone are the destination for everybody. Just as different streams of water ultimately wind up into ocean. Some go straight and some go in a crooked way, but ultimately all streams of water, just as they culminate into ocean, so also the goal of all the paths is to see you, meet you. But Vedantins say that no, moksha can be achieved only by knowledge. It depends on what you understand by moksha. Moksha means liberation, freedom. Freedom from the sorrow, freedom from sadness, freedom from a sense of limitation. But the sense of limitation is not a reality. It is a notion created by ignorance. If the so-called bondage were a reality, then you must have a real way of removing that bondage. But bondage, that I am bound, is a notion born of ignorance. Therefore, knowledge alone can remove that. Just as in case of the 10th man, the notion that the 10th man is lost is the result of ignorance. And Tvam Dashmosi, you are the 10th man, it is that Upadeśa and the knowledge alone can remove that. Therefore, there are not many paths to moksha, there is only one path, and that is knowledge. Knowledge that Soham, that I am, that knowledge alone is the means of moksha. But this knowledge requires a preparation of mind. Knowledge cannot take place just in any mind, particularly distracted mind that we discussed earlier. A mind that is free from mala and vikshepa, mind free from mala impurities of likes and dislikes and vikshepa distraction. So mala, vikshepa and avaranam, these three are said to be obstacles. Mala means impurity, which is raga dveshas, the attachments and aversions or likes and dislikes. Vikshepa is distraction. Avarana is the ignorance. So removal of ignorance requires the removal of mala and vikshepa, raga dveshas and distraction of the mind. So let us say that by karma yoga you essentially remove raga dveshas, and by Patanjali yoga you remove the distraction of the mind. Chanchalam himanah Krishna, that restlessness of the mind can be contained by Patanjali yoga. And therefore, Ramana Maharsi seems to prescribe to that. And therefore, he prescribes here also the practice of pranayama for controlling the mind, meaning that for making the mind free from distraction or restlessness. So next several verses are devoted to that. The verse number 11 says this. Vayurodhana liyate manah manah Vayurodhana liyate manah Jala pakshivad drodha sadhanam. Why don't you eat away this? Why people want to eat away the visarga, you know? Visarga is pronounced depending on what is the preceding vowel. Preceding vowel is a, then visarga is pronounced as manaha. The earlier verse, what was it? Sthitihi, then it is E. And so, if I is a previous vowel, Aihi, Ihi, Oho, Auhu, Aha, Aha. That is how the Visarga is to be pronounced. Then you do justice to Visarga, otherwise, Ai, you know, that's the way it is often pronounced. Then you do not know that there is a Visarga. Although when we chant this way, people may make fun of us, you know. People in North India, usually Visarga is pronounced you know. So if you say aha, then they will say what. So they perhaps may not appreciate that. But we are trained to recite or chant Visarga in this manner. Vayurodhanat liyate manah. Rodhanat, by restraining Vayu, means here breath. By restraining the breath, manah liyate, the mind is absorbed. What is absorption of mind? When the mind becomes free from all distractions, then the mind becomes quiet. A disquiet mind, a distracted mind, usually that's how it is. When the mind is made free from distraction, then it becomes its natural state when the mind becomes quiet. So here, Ramana Maharsi, this is a prescription of Yoga Shastra, which he just reiterates here. Vayurodhanat, by restraining the breath. The mind also becomes restrained. Jala pakshivat rodha sadhanam, just as you have a jala or a net for catching a bird. So flying bird, how do you catch? By a net. Mind is comparable to a flying bird. You require a net to catch that mind. What is that net? The prana, the breath, or the control of the breath becomes like a net to catch or restrain the mind. How you restrain the bird? For restraining the mind, the restraining the breath becomes a means of restraining the mind. And so pranayama, just for our general information, this is well known that the ayama means restrain, pranayama means restraining prana or restraining the breath. So breath has a natural movement. Usually you breathe 15 or 16 times a minute, The outgoing breath is called prana, the incoming breath is called apana. So here, the attempt is to restrain this, meaning that you deliberately not allow the breath to have its natural frequency and you impose your will upon the breath and stop it. So here the Tikakara explains that normally the breath originates from heart and emerges from the nose and goes up to about 12 fingers, So if you have a little cotton, then you can see how far the cotton moves and you know that far the breath comes. Then by restraining, not allowing the breath to come out at its own speed, you restrain it. So thus the pranayama is said to be threefold: Puraka, Rechaka, Kumbhaka. What is Puraka? Filling your lungs with prana is called Puraka. Rechaka, emptying the breath is called Rechaka. Kumbhaka, and stopping the breath is called Kumbhaka. So Kumbhaka is also twofold. Bahya Kumbhaka, Antara Kumbhaka. Meaning that Puraka, you fill in your breath and then restrain in there and not allow it to come out is called internal Kumbhaka or restraining. Or when the breath goes out, you don't allow it to come in, that is called the Bahya Kumbhaka. And so they prescribe the Puraka, Kumbhaka, Rechaka. Or Puraka, so 1:4:2 is the proportion. That one unit you breathe in, 4 units you restrain, and 2 units you breathe out. This kind of rhythms are being told, meaning that we deliberately make the breath, the movement of breath is deliberately restrained to what we want it to be. For that you use the mind. So with the mind you restrain the breath as prescribed. So the breath is restrained, the mind also gets restrained. This is the principle. Why is it so? The next verse tells us that. Chittavayavas chitkriyayutaha Shakhayordvayi Shakti Mulaka. Chittavayavaha. Instead of dual, the Ramana Maharsi uses plural here. So Chittavayavaha, because so many vayus are there, so there is prana, apana, etc. Chitta means mind, vayu means breath. Chittavayavaha, the mind and the breath. Chit kriya yutaha. They are endowed with chit and kriya. Meaning the mind is endowed with the power of thinking and the breath is endowed with the power of acting. So we have the Ichha Shakti and Kriya Shakti. The mind possesses Ichha Shakti and Jnana Shakti also, the power, no power to will. Here Ichha Shakti, the power to will. And the breath is endowed with the power to act. Thus we are given this threefold power. Jnana Shakti, Ichha Shakti and Kriya Shakti. Jnana Shakti or the power to know is the intellect. The power to will is in the mind. And power to act is in the breath or the prana. So here, Shakhayoho Dvai. These are that's an interesting usage, Shakhayoho Dvai. Brahmananam Shatam. In Sanskrit, if you say 100 Brahmanas, how do you say, Brahmananam Shatam, 100 of Brahmanas, 100 of Brahmanas. Meaning, similarly, Shakhayoho Dvai, it is two of the branches, two branches. Meaning that this Kriya Shakti and Ichha Shakti, the power to will and power to act, are like the two branches of the same power. The basic power is Shakti, is called, you can call it Maya, you can call it Prakriti, the primordial power. That primordial energy manifests itself in these two forms, the power to will and the power to act. Like a tree, two branches emanating from the same stem. Therefore, you can control one branch by controlling the other branch. So when you lower one branch, other branch also will come down if they have the same origin. You follow? Similarly, the power to act is one branch, power to will is another branch. Now, mind is not something that we can control, but breath is something we can control. Breath is more tangible than the mind, and therefore, breath is a very brilliant way of doing things. All these are very brilliant things that you can control the mind by controlling breath, because mind and breath, these two powers originate from the same source. Therefore, by controlling one, you can control the other. Shakti Mulaka Shakhayoho Dvai. These two shakhas, these two branches have the root in one power, and therefore, by controlling one, you can control the other. And it is our experience also that when the mind becomes quiet, the breathing also becomes quiet. If the breathing becomes disturbed, the mind also becomes disturbed. Breathing becomes quiet, mind also becomes quiet. So breath is tangible thing, something you can control. So by controlling something which is tangible, you are able to establish control over something that is not tangible. This is the principle. And therefore, by controlling the breath, you can control the mind. And we said, how do you control the breath? That is called pranayama. Aya means restraining the prana, restraining the natural process of breathing. By not allowing the breath to have its natural course, but you impose upon the breath by your will. So that willpower, with that you impose that, and that's how you restrain the breath. When the breath is restrained, in course of time, the mind also gets restrained. Pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyanam, meditation comes much later. What's the nature of this restraint? So when you restrain or quieten the mind with the help of restraining the breath, what's the nature of that quietening? There are two stages of the quietening of the mind. One is called the laya, other is called vinasha. Again, all of this is found in the Yoga Vasishtha, and here is a reiteration of what is said in Yoga Vasishtha. So 13th verse tells us, Laya vinashane ubhaya rodhane Layagatam punar bhavati no mrutam. Ubhaya rodhane. Ubhaya means the two. Rodhane by controlling. Ubhaya rodhane by controlling the breath as well as the mind. Chitta vayavoho rodhane nigrahe sati. When both of these are restrained. Meaning that by restraining the prana, the mind also becomes restrained. You know how much you can restrain? How much restraining the prana the yogis do that the breathing is stopped altogether. The accomplished yogis are able to sustain without apparent breathing. It is said that then you have these three nadis. The Ida, Pingala and Sushumna nadis are there, subtle passages are there. And those passages are opened up, the Sushumna nadi, and therefore very subtle breathing takes place, and the yogis, because your whole personality is so completely quiet that you require very little energy to survive, and so that subtle breathing that takes place is enough. So when the yogi is going to samadhis, the breathing stops. Breathing stops, but the person doesn't die. Because the subtle breathing provides enough energy for the body to sustain. So I don't know whether you have come across these yogis or not, but when we were children, there used to be this kind of yogis who come and they were buried in the ground. So they will dig a big hole in the ground. This yogi will go there in samadhi and you close it on the top. He will also open it after 7 days, 15 days, 1 month. And the whole town and everybody will gather, on the day when he's got to be brought out, and he's brought out and then slowly comes into consciousness. Sometimes they die also, but then comes into consciousness. That's a samadhi. That's called laya. Laya means the mind gets completely absorbed. A state similar to the state of deep sleep. Similar to, not deep sleep. In deep sleep also there is laya or absorption. Except that in deep sleep there is a blanket of ignorance. Whereas laya means here samadhi. Samadhi means absorption of the mind. Where there is sattva guna. In deep sleep there is tamo guna, darkness. In samadhi or laya there is sattva guna, or the sattva guna is there, or the light is there, the consciousness is there. Meaning that by pranayama you can reach a stage of what they call laya or samadhi. So you assume that pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana and samadhi, all the steps are followed. And one attains samadhi, where the mind is completely absorbed or resolved. But that is not enough. A mind that is in a state of laya or absorption is still not an enlightened mind. Laya vinashane. The mind is absorbed all right. But punarbhavati, laya gatam punarbhavati, that mind comes back. No mrutam, other state of mind is called vinasha, manonasha, the destruction of the mind. The absorption of the mind in samadhi like in deep sleep, but just as we wake up in deep sleep as we went, similarly also from samadhi the yogi comes out as he went in. So just merely samadhi or absorption of mind is not enlightenment. You require the knowledge or enlightenment, then the mind does not wake up, meaning that no more there is an ignorant mind. So Ramana Maharsi says that there are two states of mind, or two states of restraining the mind. One is called laya, other is called vinasha. Laya means absorption, samadhi. And vinasha is destruction of the mind. So, what is destruction? Not that the mind gets destroyed, but the ignorance of the mind gets destroyed. Mind is free from all distractions. So manonasha, vasanaksha and manonasha, this is how Yoga Shastra describes. Vasanaksha. Vasanaksha means the removal of all vasanas or subtle tendencies. So by again and again doing this samadhi, then slowly and slowly the mind, the vasanas also are destroyed, and they talk of nirbija samadhi, which is called manonasha. But real manonasha takes place when the knowledge takes place. This is what the verse 14 tells us. Pranabandhana lina manasam eka chintana nashametyada. Pranabandhanat lina manasam. So first step is lina manasam, the manolaya, the absorption of the mind, the complete quietening of the mind, the resolving of the mind. Mind becomes completely free from all distractions and becomes totally quiet, totally resolved. Then in that mind, eka chintanat, by chintanam, by contemplation upon eka, the non-dual. So after the resolving of the mind also we require knowledge. But knowledge means eka chintanam, contemplation upon the one non-dual. Soham. That contemplation can best take place when the mind is resolved. That is when the Upadeśa is given, Tattvamasi. So, or one dwells upon the statement, Soham, as a result of the teaching. Meaning that the knowledge takes place as a result of the Shravanam or Vichara or deliberation, and that takes place as a result of the teaching. The teaching becomes effective provided the mind has attained the state of quietude, and the state of quietude can be attained either by Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga, and then by this prana or by the restraining of the breath. Eka chintanat nashameti adaha. Adaha, this mind, nashameti, attains a state of destruction. The mind gets destroyed. But as I said, it is not destruction of the mind as a faculty. If the mind gets destroyed, then you become mad, you become mindless. It's not that yogis or wise people are mindless. They do have mind, very much. But what is meant by destruction of mind is destruction of ignorance of the mind. That this notion that I am such and such no more arises. So, even after laya or absorption, one does not become enlightened. Therefore, in laya or absorption of samadhi, no doubt there is rasaswadaha, there is a great experience of quietude, or you can even call it experience of non-duality. But what you require is the knowledge of non-duality, that I am the non-dual self, which is a result of the teaching. So the samskaras that are there of teaching, they become, you can see the meaning of that statement, Mahavakya, when thus the mind is resolved. Eka chintanat, by chintanam, by contemplation upon eka, by contemplation upon soham. Eka means what? The non-dual, that saha and aham, both are one. By contemplation upon that, Manaha nashameti, the mind gets destroyed, meaning that mind becomes free from ignorance and not to come back again into samsara, meaning I am such and such, those sankalpa vikalpas are no more. And the way yoga, bhakti yoga, bodhasya nishchitam. So Ramana Maharsi mentioned yoga, and therefore in these verses the yoga also is discussed as to how it is also a very useful practice for restraining the mind. But mere restraint of the mind is not adequate. What we require is an enlightened mind, the mind that sees. However, it becomes very easy for the mind to see the truth when the state of laya or absorption is there. You are not far away from the knowledge, except that knowledge does require teaching. It does require vichara or inquiry or deliberation upon the statements of scriptures, and that mind or resolve becomes an enlightened or knowledgeable mind. How is that enlightened person? The next verse described, we'll see it tomorrow. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutra Bhashya Krutau Vande Bhagavantau Punah Punah Ishvaro Gururatmeri Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hare Om. Shri Gurubhyo